I'm the Wolde, and I'm the general manager of Atlantica, Canada. So underneath our umbrella, we have a district energy business, and we're also launching a renewables business. We also have a solar development that's underway for the past year and a half. And I originally started off in accounting, but I guess relatively early on, I moved into business development roles. And at the time, this wasn't in the energy industry. This was actually in the fertilizer industry with what's now known as nutrient. And I did a lot of business development work in that kind of multinational environment in the fertilizer industry of all places. And then looking for something a little bit more local after cutting my teeth there. Then I came to NMAX to work specifically on the district energy facility and on the commercial side and developing that. And then I've just grown into that over the last number of 4 years. It's an interesting path. A lot of times you'll find engineers in these sorts of roles, but I'm a jack of all trades, so seems to fit this quite well. In the fertilizer industry, we actually use cogeneration on site in plants from both the heat and the electricity standpoint. They're actually a big consumer of natural gas. That's what's used to produce nitrogen. So those called nitrogen. But all those plants require great amounts of electricity and heat. And I was seeing when I left the transition to them having on-site electricity and thermal heat generation, which is essentially what we're talking about with decentralized energy. My experience in the electricity industry specifically is relatively recent because district energy and that value chain and cogeneration, that is a little bit more my focus. But I would say how it has changed, obviously, is the shift away from coal in Alberta here. It's massive. But I think I was just reading that the last coal-fired facility came off production just very recently here. So obviously that's a huge one. And then the next one, I think, which is just much more recent and on our minds, is this shift in fundamental market structure that the AESO and the Alberta government is undertaking. That I think you'll probably hear in Alberta is very much on people's minds. That's going to potentially shift the current environment, which is very positive towards investment, to now adding a lot of questions. It's more government intervention into an Alberta market that was very much market-based pricing. The whole concept of decentralized energy space is that there's no one silver bullet for generation. It's going to be a multitude of technologies, or at least a number of them, that are going to provide us our power, especially in a province like Alberta when we don't have hydro in the massive kind of quantities that British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec have. If you talk both gas and electricity, a decentralized model is definitely putting a stress on the transmission and distribution infrastructure. And so as we add these technologies, they're maybe more quickly maturing and tapping out and hitting capacity for existing traditional infrastructure that we have. I think what we find is there's a massive gap. There's such a distance between the consumer of the electricity or the utility, that energy, and the realities of producing that. And I think that's a big challenge. We're seeing that as we look to develop renewables. We see a lot of disinformation. We see a lot of skepticism that's unfounded. As technology moves relatively quickly, the gap in knowledge with the consuming public is increasing. And I think that is a challenge. That's a challenge for industry, but also for government. I think also government finding its place in the architecture of developing new energy infrastructure. I think Alberta is struggling to find where that place is, that sweet spot between an open market concept, especially in case obviously electricity, and putting required safety guides for the consumer so that electricity continues to be produced at a affordable level. So I think our government, we've seen that over the past year with a pause on renewables. And then on top of that, a restructuring of pricing in the market. They're looking to find that balance to maintain progress in innovation, progress with outside investment, but yet looking after the consumer. I would say the underestimation of how important the regional geography, the regional constraints are, province by province, are in the differences between each province in this massive country being able to be in a position to adopt a transition to new energy technology. So whether that be geothermal, whether that be, renewables or otherwise, I think that's one thing. We can get into politics a little bit that isn't necessarily recognized. For instance, I keep going back to hydro. Both BC, Ontario, Quebec have over 80% of their power supplied by hydro. And that's because of the geography. That's because of the benefits of leveraging that inside the province. So I think there needs to be more sensitivity to the regional disparities of adopting this technology, that they're real. They're real based on available resources. We have natural gas. We don't have water. So that's very simple. And then I think the second thing, so having said that, regional disparities and differences, is without government policy to drive the adoption of carbon free, it's a very tall order. What we see is very well-intentioned private industry, and we are starting to see individual boards of major companies set targets to reduce carbon, which then promotes investment in decentralized energy concepts, but without government policy to incentivize, and I'm talking both municipal, provincial, federal, that push that's needed to move along, it's not there. That you have to have municipal, provincial, and federal policy all working in lockstep in order to make it attractive, or and sometimes to initiate the conversion to these decentralized energy concepts. The transmission and distribution is a major bottleneck. There needs to be a deep understanding from both the provincial and municipal governments about the infrastructure that we currently have, the targets for electrification and adoption of these technologies, and what changes need to be made to the transmission and distribution system. So what I'm seeing in our company, we're actually an internationally owned company out of Spain. So I've got a whole different appreciation for where the investment dollars go. For instance, when funds come from Atlantica into Calgary, they come very quietly, but they've actually invested millions of dollars because the environment in Alberta hasn't been to date very attractive for decentralized energy type of investments for PV. The spinoff is the work that we have thrown into the community. So when I start to get familiar with the community that supports decentralized energy development, it can be anywhere from the engineering groups to the individual consultants and environmental groups. I'm seeing those dollars flow to the broader industry that supports that development. So there can be a real impact locally. I think, though, that we need to be very aware that the big dollars that are required to invest, so our investment is going to be pushing about 200 million for our 125 megawatt project. that is more and more going to be sourced internationally, and those international dollars are going to go to the most attractive markets. As far as innovation goes, we recently received about $6.5 million for electric boiler innovation, and that was from Emissions Reduction Alberta. When you talk about the innovators, you can't decouple that from incentives that the government has for new technology. So Atlantica has assets all over the world. So they've got them in Italy and Spain and South Africa and Chile and in the US. So what they've done there is they've got some teams located within those geographies to really understand the landscape for investment in renewables and decentralized architecture. That's extremely important. So as far as what has Atlantica done, that's what they've done is invest in local teams that puts them on the ground to understand how attractive that particular market is in a geography for deploying decentralized energy investments. So you can only monitor these future and upcoming trends from your computer sitting wherever in London, England, or whatever, so much. And then you have to have a market presence so that you understand the regulatory environment, you understand the political environment, because all of this affects your ability to successfully invest in that market, which means you need to have people there who are understanding that environment and whether if it's ready for investment, if it's ready to have these solutions deployed and invested in and built and operated for 20, 30 years. I do think that's a major factor for sure. I would say from the renewables side, like 85% of Atlantica's assets are truly from renewable sources, and 15% are from high efficiency natural gas consumption. Having now gained some insight into adoption in all these various countries that Atlantica is involved with, it truly is the regional readiness to adopt sustainable energy technologies. And I keep coming back to the local environment and the local political environment and government policy. I was just talking to somebody about a month ago about a deployment in Italy, and huge challenges there, very much like Alberta. And there's a successful deployment of a solar facility there, but the challenges that they saw were all very specific to that country. I know I've mentioned that a number of times, but it can't be understated. The impact of public policy and government legislation on the deployment of decentralized energy technology, it's massive. And on the other side, to give you a specific example, right now in the Midwest, so Ohio and a few other states, they're very positive towards the adoption of battery energy storage, for instance. So there is a lot of investment dollars that are being funneled towards that in the Midwest US. And a lot of it is because the government and utilities have made it attractive. Even though we're in Alberta and we should have all this pipe manufacturing technology here, the single source of pipe for all district energy piping is from Poland. And that's it. And it's crazy. But there has not been an adoption by any manufacturer of the special needs of the carbon steel pipe and insulation. So we simply can't source it from here. Solar panels, they're all from China or they're from Korea. They're all from that area of the world. Cabling, so high voltage cabling, that can be sourced from Ontario, for instance. Some specialty components, and I saw that Young Buick is actually on your list. We actually have one of his engines installed. Those engines primarily come from Austria. There's certain components we can only get from Austria, but we always go local if possible. And where it's impossible, we have to go international. The biggest challenge that we have in Alberta is the lack of alignment between municipal, provincial, and federal policies incentivizing sustainable energy. That by far is it's the biggest one. And then locally municipal, it would be lack of local incentives for developers to incentivize and push them towards adoption of sustainable energy technologies. That's the biggest barrier. A specific example. So Vancouver and Toronto are much more integrated as far as, let's just talk district energy. Vancouver has 25 district energy systems throughout Vancouver. In Calgary, we have one private, which is us. And then we have about 4 or 5 institutional, like UC and the hospital. And that 25 in Vancouver is because their municipal and provincial policies incentivize the reduction of gas consumption and adoption of things like ground source heat pumps, shallow geothermal, things like that. A lot of this is risk taking that the market's going to move along and that will be there providing low to no carbon energy when they need it. I think in Alberta specifically, the cost of construction, and this could apply to solar plants, this can apply to everything. We've seen the price of construction and the price of materials, as everybody has since COVID, increased dramatically. So I'd say that's one of the bigger ones is the seemingly hockey stick kind of inflation we're seeing on costs. I think that what we've seen on the positive is we've seen a move to the major companies adopting their own carbon reduction targets, despite what government policy may be supporting. So finally, big, large companies are saying, hey, by 2030, we want to be carbon free. And how can you help us get there? From a leadership perspective, you need to be persistent in your approach. And that persistence needs to be focused across both government and industry because there's a lot of education that still needs to take place. You need to be persistently and consistently in both the government space, lobbying. You need to be meeting with the appropriate levels of government, and that includes on the municipal side. So persistence there. I think also at the same time, you need to be a realist. So there's not going to be an overnight conversion. It's going to be a whole confluence of solutions that's going to get us there incrementally. So I think you also need to be realistic in how you're going to achieve kind of your energy goals. And it's very region specific. What's going to be doable here may not be the same thing that's doable on the West Coast. And then on the district energy side, we're continuing to look for technology advancements there. We already successfully ran a pilot for hydrogen last year where we proved out we can consume hydrogen in our existing plant to have an immediate impact on lowering carbon emissions. We just need somebody to come up with a fuel supply that's affordable and consistent. I think there's still opportunity with hydrogen as a fuel. We're looking at different thermal technologies like waste heat recovery. This is a big one for low carbon. What you do is you essentially take thermal heat from gray water sewage lines and you upgrade that into a high enough temperature that it can actually heat buildings. I think that there's a realization for industry to utilize decentralized generation more than 10 years ago, even. What I mean by that is I talked earlier about fertilizer plants. using cogeneration on site. I think just has a huge 800 megawatt or 900 megawatt cogen unit that they're using. We're seeing firms with huge server farms. So for artificial intelligence, we're seeing them require on-site power to generate enough electricity for their server farms. So I think industry is now coming to the realization of the generation and transmission limitations. And the fix is to have decentralized on site and tap into industry players like us to make that come true.